For Best Outstanding Live News Program, this is ABC News Live. Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, jaw-dropping. The most powerful stories of our time. Nightline, on right after Kimmel and streaming on Hulu.
Right now on ABC News Live, tensions boiling over in the Middle East. One of Hamas's top leaders assassinated in Iran hours after an Israeli strike killed a top Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. We're live in the region amid fears of a wider conflict. Plus, former President Donald Trump will speak at a conference for black journalists later this hour. What to expect and where the presidential race stands right now. And Delta Airlines says that massive tech outage cost the company about $500 million. Now they're suing. Details later this hour. Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Pilgrim. Our top story this hour, the growing threat of a wider regional conflict in the Middle East after the assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Hamas says a rocket hit the room where he was staying in the Iranian capital. Both Hamas and Iran blame Israel for the attack. And while the Israeli government has not claimed responsibility, this image was briefly posted to its official press office Facebook page. All of that coming one day after Israel did claim responsibility for an attack targeting a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut, Lebanon. The U.S. was given advance notice of that strike, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Biden administration didn't know anything about the attack in Tehran. We have team coverage with Matt Rivers in Tel Aviv, Marcus Moore in Beirut, and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy. Matt, let's start with you. What do we know about the strike in Tehran, and what is the Israeli government saying about it?
Well, frankly, we don't know all that much because the Iranian government is really controlling the flow of information here, and the Israeli government is not commenting at all. We do expect to hear from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at some point later on this evening here in Tel Aviv, but what he's going to say, we're still not sure, and they are not claiming credit for that assassination in Tehran. We first learned about Ismail Haniyeh and his death there in Tehran from Hamas. They put out the statement saying that their political leader, one of the two most important people in that organization, had been killed as what they say was an Israeli airstrike. And that's pretty much all they've said. So it's really controlling the flow of information there. And the Israelis aren't commenting even. And I think the big question now is, how does Iran respond? Remember, Haniyeh was only in Tehran at the request of the Iranians to be there for the presidential inauguration of their new president over the weekend. He was in their security bubble, and they allowed this to happen. So how do they respond here? And that, because we don't know what or where or how that looks, that is why people are concerned that this spark could turn into a fire. This escalation could really begin to be a regional conflict.
Yeah, so many questions still there. Marcus Moore, I'm curious. Israel is believed to have taken out a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut yesterday. What are we hearing from the Iranian-backed militant group?
Well, Eva, we have not heard a lot from the group today. We know, according to Israeli officials, that they carried out this airstrike yesterday evening in the Dahia district of southern Beirut. That is the Hezbollah stronghold. And the only information we got from Hezbollah in the hours after the strike was them acknowledging that Fuad Shukr was inside that building. But outside of that, Hezbollah has said nothing else about the strike. And that's significant, Eva, because every day since October 7th, we have received statements from Hezbollah claiming responsibility for attacks or strikes on targets in northern Israel. And today there hasn't been a single statement from Hezbollah in that regard, and also no specific response to Israel's strike here in Beirut yesterday. So that happens along with the questions of how Hezbollah will respond to the strike, because as you know, Eva, even before yesterday's operation, Hezbollah said that any strike on Beirut would be met with a strong response. It would be met with a strike on Tel Aviv. And now everyone is watching and waiting to see what Hezbollah decides to do, if anything. Eva.
Yeah, one of the other delicate pieces of this whole puzzle, Mick, is there have been a lot of negotiations about a possible ceasefire in Gaza. Do you think that's even possible right now with everything else that's going on in the region?
So it's going to be incredibly difficult. Obviously, with these strikes in Beirut and now in Tehran, it is extremely likely that both Hezbollah and Iran, either through Hezbollah or directly through special operations or potentially drone in missiles like we saw before, are going to respond. And quite frankly, as Qatar and Egypt have mentioned, the main individual that was part of the ceasefire for Hamas was Hania. So it's very unlikely that the ceasefire negotiations are moving forward at all now, unless something dramatically changes. The next step, unfortunately, could be a substantial escalation and not leading toward a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's a possibility of a substantial escalation. Do you think that there's a possibility that we're moving closer to the U.S. becoming directly involved in some way in this conflict?
Yes, unfortunately, I think that is correct. Hezbollah has much more military capacity than Hamas. They have over 100,000, almost 150,000 rockets and missiles. Many of them are precision guided. I bring that up because even the as good as the Iron Dome, the air and missile defense in Israel is, it cannot deal with that level of incoming. So the United States is moving assets to the region. They may be used to try to mitigate these threats from the air. It's not known yet. Israel would have to ask for that, but this is something that the United States has talked about before, and one of the reasons why they keep such a large presence of naval assets, essentially aircraft carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. Should this eventuality happen, we would be prepared. We obviously don't want that to occur, but that is something that's ultimately not up to the United States.
Yeah, and all eyes all around the world watching. Mick Mulroy, Marcus Moore, Matt Rivers, thank you all for joining us. Now to the election, Vice President Kamala Harris rallied thousands of voters last night in the battleground state of Georgia, where she again called on former President Donald Trump to debate her.
Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
And sources tell ABC News Harris and a still-to-be-announced running mate will crisscross battleground states starting next week in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, later this hour, former President Donald Trump will participate in a conversation at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. He's claimed the vice president disrespectfully refused to attend. ABC News White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and senior reporter Catherine Falters join me now for more. Mary Alice, let's start with you. We are reportedly less than a week away from knowing Harris's running mate. They're kicking things off in Philadelphia. Is that a hint or just a coincidence?
Yeah, Eva, good question. It's obviously generated a lot of buzz. We know that the Harris campaign is going to be blitzing across the country, 7 battleground states they're going to try to hit next week, and that the vice president is going to make all of these campaign stops with her running mate. So obviously everyone here in Washington, across the country, waiting for her to announce her pick. Definitely generated some buzz that tour is going to kick off in Philadelphia. We know that the first-term Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro has been on the top of many lists. He's seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party. There's a lot of folks here in Washington, I can tell you, that are really hoping he will join the ticket, largely because he is so popular in Pennsylvania, and that is a must-win state for Democrats. So a lot of Democrats hoping that he is being considered. But I will tell you, the Harris campaign told us not to read too much into the fact that this tour is kicking off in Pennsylvania. The tour does go across the country, including it ends in Arizona, where we know there's another top contender, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. So it could be that she is capping off this trip with her running mate's hometown. So we don't know for sure, but we do know that we are just a matter of days away from her announcing her pick. Her campaign is barely a week old, Eva, but obviously she has a tough deadline here. The party wants to have her running mate named so that delegates can vote for that whole united ticket when they start their virtual roll call next week.
And Catherine, I have to ask, Harris last night vowing to sign a border security bill, blaming Trump for killing it last spring. All this happening while J.D. Vance is set to visit the southern border tomorrow. How are both candidates handling this immigration issue?
Yeah, look, Republicans, of course, are trying to use this trip that J.D. Vance will take to the border tomorrow as to focus essentially on Harris's immigration record. According to Republicans, they've labeled her the border czar of the Biden administration. It's worth pointing out that while migrant crossings were high, they reached record highs at least the first 3 years of the Biden administration. They're now at a record low here. So they're putting a little bit of a spin on that. Republicans trying to highlight what they say are Harris's failed policies at the border. But what you've seen from Kamala Harris, and especially yesterday in her rally, is trying to flip the script in a way. She said that she's been tougher on immigration than former President Trump has, something obviously that he would not be happy to hear or react to in that way. So you'll continue to hear that from Harris. But so far, the Republican line of attack, as they've struggled to find one, frankly, on Harris and her campaign, is to try and focus on the border. Now, how that ultimately will work out for them, we'll have to see. But they are starting by sending down Trump's running mate to the border tomorrow.
And Catherine, we are expecting to see former President Trump at the NABJ conference on a panel there in just a little bit. What do you expect to hear him say? And I'm curious, why do you think he agreed to do this?
Well, it's a good question because he didn't agree previously when NABJ had invited him in the past. He declined. So he's obviously decided to show up here today. I think there's a number of things. Obviously, this isn't a typical venue for him, especially as it relates to sitting down with reporters, including our own Rachel Scott. He's essentially sat down with outlets that are more conservative, that he views as friendly to him, if you will. So there's that element of it. So it would be intriguing to hear how he answers the questions. But on the other hand, it also comes as the Trump campaign has been trying to court black voters more. They have seen a shift of especially those younger black male voters over to the Trump campaign a bit, voting Republican. So they're trying to capitalize at least on that momentum. Now, again, whether or not that works is to be determined, but it does show that Trump is essentially having this renewed effort to focus on those voters.
Catherine Falders, Mary Alice Parks, thank you both. Now to Capitol Hill, where senators unveiled a bipartisan plan to make child care more affordable. The Senate also overwhelmingly passed a bill designed to protect children from dangerous content online. It's the first major effort by Congress in decades to hold tech companies more accountable. Elizabeth Schulze joins me now from the Hill. And Elizabeth, I'm curious, what is in this Kids Online Safety Act, and how likely is it actually to become law?
Well, Eva, this did pass the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, which is saying something because it's rare here that we get something with such a clear bipartisan win. But this act still does need to go over to the House. It still needs to be passed, and the House is not in session until September. So a little bit of a damper on the momentum, at least. But when it comes to what this would actually do, Eva, the Kids Online Safety Act is really a sweeping measure to try to hold tech companies more responsible for some of the content that's on their platform for kids and teens. So when you think about what that means, this would put the burden on tech companies to try to filter out some of that harmful content that could lead to anxiety, depression, cyberbullying, abuse. Tech companies also would have to try to give the option to younger users, this is for people under the age of 17, to avoid addictive features. So think about auto-scrolling or autoplay that keep people on the apps for a long time. It would also mean that the default setting when you open up your apps on social media would be to the highest standard of privacy and security. So this would really create a set of strict safeguards that we have not seen in place for decades. A lot of the laws on the books were written before companies like TikTok or Instagram were invented. So there is a clear effort to try to hold some of these tech companies accountable. We've heard lobbying groups say they do not support this. In many ways, they say it's unconstitutional because it could lead to the censoring of free speech. So that could be a hurdle as far as final passage over in the House. But ultimately, this is a milestone when it comes to this really decades-long fight, Eva, over how to take on some of these tech companies.
Elizabeth, I have to ask you about childcare. We're both parents. We are both moms. We know how expensive childcare is right now. What are you hearing from senators about the bipartisan plan for affordable childcare?
And this is really interesting, Eva, because this is a plan that was put forward today by Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Katie Britt. And the fact is that they said this is something that they hear about all the time from their own constituents, the skyrocketing cost of childcare and the fact that so many families struggle to find affordable care. So what they're doing is putting forward bipartisan legislation that would expand existing tax credits that are already part of the system, that would expand those credits, especially to lower income families, so that they could use those tax credits. They'd be refundable toward child care. And it also would create a pilot program to try to basically subsidize child care centers to keep those centers better funded and better staffed, which has been a huge issue. There has not been staffing and resources at so many daycares that we've seen, and that's also driven up the cost for families. So I asked the senators, I had a chance to talk to both of them, and said, what's the likelihood that this could get done and pass on a bipartisan basis? Here's what they said.
People are talking to every member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, House or Senate. We're hearing about this at home. We need to find a solution. And this is a novel, kind of a new approach.
There's a lot of good ideas, but to your point, whether it's the cost or the implementation ability, it makes it challenging. We think this is something that not only can be done, but should be done, and we believe we can garner support for it.
Something that both the senators say they hear from their constituents about. There's a need to do something about this, but at the same time, a lot of these policies, Eva, that are bipartisan, like the child tax credit, a separate policy that helps families get more subsidies, basically get tax credits for having children. There's going to be a vote on that here tomorrow. More of a symbolic vote and not expected to pass. So we do see a lot of these policies that we know senators say they're being demanded from their constituents always get caught up in the politics too, Eva.
So interesting. Elizabeth Schulze, thank you so much for your insight. Coming up, if you got stuck at the airport after that CrowdStrike and Microsoft outage last weekend, pay attention. Delta says it cost them about $500 million, and they're not taking the losses lying down. Details next.
Whenever news breaks,
we are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland, let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming
ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. ABC News Live, honored with 8 Emmy nominations, more than any other streaming news network. And ABC News Live Prime with Linsey Davis, the first and only streaming show nominated for Best Outstanding Live News Program. This is ABC News Live. Nightline, the stories that shape your world, that shape your life. Dramatic, stunning, empowering, jaw-dropping. The most powerful stories of our time. Nightline, on right after Kimmel and streaming on Hulu. You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Keep streaming with ABC News Live.
Welcome back. There's growing fallout from CrowdStrike and Microsoft's global tech outage that left thousands stranded across the globe last week. Delta Airlines is now seeking potential damages from CrowdStrike after the outage caused an abundance of internal computer issues and prompted thousands of canceled flights for more than 6 days. Transportation reporter Sam Sweeney joins me now for more. And Sam, what more do we know about Delta's potential lawsuit against CrowdStrike and Microsoft?
Well, Delta CEO Ed Bastian said this morning that it cost the airline $500 million. You remember Delta was hit hardest. They say they had 40,000 servers that needed to individually be turned back on and reset, and many of them did not reset the way they should have been, and that's why it took so long for Delta to get back on track. They canceled more than 6,000 flights in the days after that CrowdStrike meltdown, and now they want their money. Delta is saying, look, they have an obligation to their shareholders and to their customers and to their employees to get some of that money back. Will they get all of it back? Likely not. $500 million million from a company like CrowdStrike could really put that company out of business. So it remains anybody's guess what they will actually get. And they still haven't filed the lawsuit yet, so we don't have the specific details of exactly what they are seeking.
So the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, warned airline CEOs they must provide cash refunds for the cancellations. What should people know who were affected by these cancellations?
Yeah, a lot of people have been filing complaints with the Department of Transportation. The Secretary says thousands of complaints have come in, and a number of them have said that the airlines were automatically refunding, but they were giving, future flight credits. But the law states that if your flight is canceled and it is within the airline's control, so it's not weather, for example, that you are entitled to a cash refund if you choose not to fly on a later flight. And they want the airlines to make it easy for customers. They want it to be transparent, the rules and what they are entitled to, in addition to hotels and food vouchers.
All right, Sam Sweeney, thanks for that information. Coming up, a big day for Team USA in gymnastics and men's basketball. We've got the latest highlights from Paris right after this.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions.
Operational nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it.
Not a tear in it.
How important is this label right here, Made in the USA? Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love this.
Great work.
Hi.
Where are you? Where are you?
Appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Good to meet you. Ismail? David.
David.
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast. ABC News Live, honored with 8 Emmy nominations, more than any other streaming news network. And ABC News Live Prime with Linsey Davis, the first and only streaming show nominated for Best Outstanding Live News Program. Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Reporting from the 2024 Summer Games in Paris, I'm Maggie Rulli. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. A key ally of Venezuela's President Maduro joining the growing list of leaders expressing concern over disputed results of Venezuela's most recent election. Colombia's president is calling for a full release of vote counts and warns a failure to do so could result in, quote, violent polarization and permanent division. Venezuela's government has so far refused to release any individual polling tallies. Carrie Lake has won Arizona's GOP Senate primary and will face off against Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego. The two will be competing to fill the seat currently held by Kyrsten Sinema and could be key in determining who controls the Senate. Lake secured the nomination with heavy support from former President Trump. Starbucks sales may be in need of a caffeine boost. For the second quarter in a row, the coffee giant reported a dip in in-store sales as profits continue to shrink. The company's CEO cited struggles in the brand's China locations as a cause for the decline. Despite that, Starbucks shares are up about 4% today. Well, the show finally went on for the athletes competing in the Paris Olympics triathlon today, despite concerns about water quality in the Seine River. Both men and women triathletes diving headfirst into the water today, just one day after the men's event had been postponed due to elevated bacteria levels caused by heavy rains last week. French President Emmanuel Macron posting today that they achieved the impossible, that the Seine is swimmable. And we're also waiting for Team USA men's basketball to take on South Sudan later today. The war-torn country's team almost beating Team USA during a friendly match in London before the Paris Games. For more on this, let's bring in ABC's Inez de la Catera, who is watching it all for us. And Inez, we have to first talk about this triathlon situation. Was it really safe to swim in the river today?
Hey, Eva, that's what they say. But there was so much skepticism regarding the Seine. You know, ever since organizers first announced that they wanted to hold the triathlon and open water swimming in the Seine, the triathlon training sessions over the weekend actually had to be canceled because of poor water quality linked to heavy rains. And even the men's triathlon, which was set to be held yesterday, had to be postponed to today. And it did rain overnight, so it was really anyone's guess whether the competition would be able to go ahead as planned. But they did pull it off, both the men and women's competitions going ahead, and it really made for some spectacular images. I ran down to try and catch a glimpse of it for myself, and it was really cool to see, and it was packed. I mean, so many people coming down to try and see it for themselves. This was a historic moment. It was the first time that anyone's really been able to swim in the Seine in 100 years. Swimming had been banned in the Seine because of poor water quality, so you have all sorts of officials now touting that accomplishment, very proud of what they've done, and we are expecting more swimming in the Seine on August 9th for open water swimming.
It will be so much fun to watch. It's also been incredibly hot in Paris over the past few days. I'm curious how this is affecting the athletes because air conditioning is not plenty there.
That's right. Yeah, there's no AC in Paris for the most part. So, I mean, we're having so much fun, but we are boiling. Yesterday was the hottest day of the year in Paris. Temperatures are a little cooler today, but it has been brutal. So organizers are doing everything they can to try and keep people, you know, cool, both for people going to watch these events, many of those events being held outdoors, and to try and keep the athletes cool as well, because they're, of course, having to compete in these temperatures. So they're encouraging people to drink water. They've set up cooling stations. At the beach volleyball right behind me at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, they have volunteers with hoses that have been hosing people down with water to try and keep people cool. But we are looking forward to those cooler temperatures.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Also, what can we expect to happen today with Team USA's men's basketball taking on South Sudan?
Yeah, all eyes on that game. That's a big one for Team USA tonight. So Team USA, of course, on the basketball side has this amazing lineup, right? So you've got LeBron James and Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, all teaming up for the Olympics. That's the first time they've teamed up for the Olympics, so it's been very exciting to watch them. They easily beat Serbia a couple days ago, but they are up against South Sudan this evening, and they did play an exhibition game a couple weeks ago that they almost lost to South Sudan. They only won by 1 point. The American coach afterwards talking about how they had underestimated South Sudan. They hadn't properly prepared for what South Sudan is capable of. So we'll all be watching that. Worth pointing out that South Sudan is the newest country. It's only been around since 2011. They have no players in the NBA, so if they pull it off, it would be quite a feat. But yes, all eyes on that game tonight.
Yeah, their coach there, though, an NBA veteran, definitely doing big things there in that country. Inez de la Catera, thank you so much. The news never stops. You can find us anywhere you stream live news. And if you're on the go, we're on the ABC News app and abcnews.com too. I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. There's much more news up next.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions.
Operational nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it.
Not a tear in it.
How important is this label right here, Made in the USA?
Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love this.
Great work.
Hi.
Where are you? Where are you?
Appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Good to meet you. Ismail? David.
David.
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
I watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
First thing in the morning.
There's a lot going on.
We're still in a flash flood warning. To catch you up with what happened overnight. Police in riot gear arresting dozens of protesters.
What's happening today? Escalating tensions in the Middle East.
What people are talking about. The migrant crisis.
Fast, straightforward.
With some fun in between.
Check out the Gator on the 17th hole.
The buzzkill in baseball.
First thing in the morning.
America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
On ABC News Live.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families.
On the ground in Ukraine.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Reporting from Monterey Park, California, I'm Robin Roberts. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Right now on ABC News Live, tensions boiling over in the Middle East. One of Hamas's top leaders assassinated in Iran hours after an Israeli strike killed a top Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. We're live in the region amid fears of a wider conflict. Plus, former President Donald Trump will speak at a conference for black journalists later this hour. What to expect and where the presidential race stands right now. And Delta Airlines says that massive tech outage cost the company about $500 million. Now they're suing. Details later this hour. Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Pilgrim. Our top story this hour, the growing threat of a wider regional conflict in the Middle East after the assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Hamas says a rocket hit the room where he was staying in the Iranian capital. Both Hamas and Iran blamed Israel for the attack. And while the Israeli government has not claimed responsibility, this image was briefly posted to its official press office Facebook page. All of that coming one day after Israel did claim responsibility for an attack targeting a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut, Lebanon. The U.S. was given advance notice of that strike, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Biden administration didn't know anything about the attack in Tehran. We have team coverage starting with ABC's Matt Rivers in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, Eva, the Iranian government really controlling the flow of information about what they say was this assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the #1 political leader for Hamas, the international face of that organization, the person who was perhaps the most key person in the negotiations that are ongoing for that ceasefire deal. They were the ones, it was Hamas, putting out the fact that he was killed in what they say was an Israeli assassination, and the Iranian government really controlling the flow of information in the sense that we don't know much more than that at this point. The Israelis, for their part, not even commenting on this, basically saying that they're not going to give us any information about this. They're not taking any direct credit for this assassination. And so all of us are kind of left in the dark in terms of more information that could come out about this strike. But what we are certain of is that it is a big deal. The person who was killed, extremely important. Also where he was killed, extremely important. In the heart of Iran, in the capital city of Tehran. And if you believe Hamas, it was the Israelis sending in a missile strike to kill this top leader of Hamas. It is a huge deal. It's an embarrassment to the Iranians because that person, Haniyeh, was only there because the Iranians invited him to be there for the inauguration of their new president over the weekend. He was in their security bubble, under their protection, and they allowed this to happen. So how do they respond moving forward? That is the big question. They're going to respond. The Revolutionary Guard Corps there in Iran saying they will be responding with severe punishment, as they called it. But what that looks like, when it happens, how it happens, these are open questions at this point, Eva.
All right, Matt Rivers, thank you. Well, fire. Vice President Kamala Harris rallied thousands of voters last night in the battleground state of Georgia, where she again called on former President Donald Trump to debate her.
Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
And sources tell ABC News Harris and a still-to-be-announced running mate will crisscross battleground states starting next week in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, later this hour, former President Donald Trump will participate in a conversation at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. He's claimed the vice president disrespectfully refused to attend. ABC News White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and senior reporter Catherine Falters join me now for more. Mary Alice, let's start with you. We are reportedly less than a week away from knowing Harris's running mate. They're kicking things off in Philadelphia. Is that a hint or just a coincidence?
Yeah, Eva, good question. It's obviously generated a lot of buzz. We know that the Harris campaign is going to be blitzing across the country, 7 battleground states they're going to try to hit next week, and that the vice president is going to make all of these campaign stops with her running mate. So obviously everyone here in Washington, across the country, waiting for her to announce her pick. Definitely generated some buzz that tour is going to kick off in Philadelphia. We know that the first-term Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro has been on the top of many lists. He's seen as a rising star in the Democratic Party. There's a lot of folks here in Washington, I can tell you, that are really hoping he will join the ticket, largely because he is so popular in Pennsylvania, and that is a must-win state for Democrats. So a lot of Democrats hoping that he is being considered. But I will tell you, the Harris campaign told us not to read too much into the fact that this tour is kicking off in Pennsylvania. The tour does go across the country, including it ends in Arizona, where we know there's another top contender, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. So it could be that she is capping off this trip with her running mate's hometown. So we don't know for sure, but we do know that we are just a matter of days away from her announcing her pick. Her campaign is barely a week old, Eva, but obviously she has a tough deadline here. The party wants to have her running mate named so that delegates can vote for that whole united ticket when they start their virtual roll call next week.
And Catherine, I have to ask, Harris last night vowing to sign a border security bill, blaming Trump for killing it last spring. All this happening while J.D. Vance is set to visit the southern border tomorrow. How are both candidates handling this immigration issue?
Yeah, look, Republicans, of course, are trying to use this trip that J.D. Vance will take to the border tomorrow as to focus essentially on Harris's immigration record. According to Republicans, they've labeled her the border czar of the Biden administration. It's worth pointing out that while migrant crossings were high, they reached record highs at least the first 3 years of the Biden administration. They're now at a record low here. So they're putting a little bit of a spin on that. Republicans trying to highlight what they say are Harris's failed policies at the border. But what you've seen from Kamala Harris, and especially yesterday in her rally, is trying to flip the script in a way. She said that she's been tougher on immigration than former President Trump has, something obviously that he would not be happy to hear or react to in that way. So you'll continue to hear that from Harris. But so far, the Republican line of attack, as they've struggled to find one, frankly, on Harris and her campaign, is to try and focus on the border. Now, how that ultimately will work out for them, we'll have to see, but they are starting by sending down Trump's running mate to the border tomorrow.
And Catherine, we are expecting to see former President Trump at the NABJ conference on a panel there in just a little bit. What do you expect to hear him say? And I'm curious, why do you think he agreed to do this?
Well, it's a good question because he didn't agree previously when NABJ had invited him in the past. He declined. So he's obviously decided to show up here today. I think there's a number of things. Obviously, this isn't a typical venue for him, especially as it relates to sitting down with reporters, including our own Rachel Scott. He's essentially sat down with outlets that are more conservative, that he views as friendly to him, if you will. So there's that element of it. So it'd be intriguing to hear how he answers the questions. But on the other hand, it also comes as the Trump campaign has been trying to court black voters more. They have seen a shift of especially those younger black male voters over to the Trump campaign a bit, voting Republican. So they're trying to capitalize at least on that momentum. Now, again, whether or not that works is to be determined, but it does show that Trump is essentially having this renewed effort to focus on those voters.
Catherine Falters, Mary Alice Parks, thank you both. Now to Capitol Hill, where senators unveiled a bipartisan plan to make child care more affordable. The Senate also overwhelmingly passed a bill designed to protect children from dangerous content online. It's the first major effort by Congress in decades to hold tech companies more accountable. Elizabeth Schulze joins me now from the Hill. And Elizabeth, I'm curious, what is in this Kids Online Safety Act, and how likely is it actually to become law?
Well, Eva, this did pass the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, which is saying something because it's rare here that we get something with such clear bipartisan win, But this act still does need to go over to the House. It still needs to be passed, and the House is not in session until September. So a little bit of a damper on the momentum, at least. But when it comes to what this would actually do, Eva, the Kids Online Safety Act is really a sweeping measure to try to hold tech companies more responsible for some of the content that's on their platform for kids and teens. So when you think about what that means, this would put the burden on tech companies to try to filter out some of that harmful content that could lead to anxiety, depression, cyberbullying, abuse. Tech companies also would have to try to give the option to younger users, this is for people under the age of 17, to avoid addictive features. So think about auto-scrolling or autoplay that keep people on the apps for a long time. It would also mean that the default setting when you open up your apps on social media would be to the highest standard of privacy and security. So this would really create a set of strict safeguards that we have not seen in place for decades. A lot of the laws on the books were written before companies like TikTok or Instagram were invented. So there is a clear effort to try to hold some of these tech companies accountable. We've heard lobbying groups say they do not they support this. In many ways, they say it's unconstitutional because it could lead to the censoring of free speech. So that could be a hurdle as far as final passage over in the House. But ultimately, this is a milestone when it comes to this really decades-long fight, Eva, over how to take on some of these tech companies.
Elizabeth, I have to ask you about childcare. We're both parents. We are both moms.
Yeah.
We know how expensive childcare is right now. Yeah. What are you hearing from senators about the bipartisan plan for affordable childcare?
And this is really interesting, Eva, because this is a plan that was put forward today by Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Katie Britt. And the fact is that they said this is something that they hear about all the time from their own constituents, the skyrocketing cost of childcare and the fact that so many families struggle to find affordable care. So what they're doing is putting forward bipartisan legislation that would expand existing tax credits that are already part of the system, that would expand those credits, especially to lower income families, so that they could use those tax credits. They'd be refundable toward child care. And it would also create a pilot program to try to basically subsidize child care centers to keep those centers better funded and better staffed, which has been a huge issue. There has not been staffing and resources at so many daycares that we've seen, and that's also driven up the cost for families. So I asked the senators, I had a chance to talk to both of them, and said, what's the likelihood that this could get done and pass on a bipartisan basis? Here's what they said.
People are talking to every member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, House or Senate. We're hearing about this at home. We need to find a solution. And this is a novel, kind of a new approach.
There's a lot of good ideas, but to your point, whether it's the cost or the implementation ability, it makes it challenging. We think this is something that not only can be done, but should be done, and we believe we can garner support for it.
Something that both the senators say they hear from their constituents about. There's a need to do something about this, but at the same time, a lot of these policies, Eva, that are bipartisan, like the child tax credit, a separate policy that helps families get more subsidies, basically get tax credits for having children. There's going to be a vote on that here tomorrow, more of a symbolic vote and not expected to pass. So we do see a lot of these policies that we know senators say they're being demanded from their constituents always get caught up in the politics too, Eva.
So interesting. Elizabeth Schulze, thank you so much. And firefighters are battling one of the largest fires in California's history as extreme heat moves into the area today. The steadily growing Park Fire in Northern California is now the 5th largest wildfire ever in the state, with over 380,000 acres burned so far. The smoke from that and other fires is spreading as far as Denver. ABC News' Mola Lenghi has the latest.
Wildfires wreaking havoc on the West Coast. Thousands of personnel have been battling the Park Fire for a week, but the fire's steadily growing bigger, becoming the 5th largest in state history.
Well, this is just a small taste of what firefighters continue to deal with, these spot fires popping up with the potential of spreading. But the Park Fire here in Northern California is not the only fire burning. There are dozens and dozens throughout the West.
Christy and Michael Deneau of Paradise, California, lost their home in the 2018 fire that ravaged the town. Now, the home they rebuilt in Cohasset, also gone. But this time, they were able to save some priceless possessions.
The most important things I grabbed was me and my brother and sister have my mom's ashes along with my dad. And so I was able to grab a few little pictures and her ashes.
Firefighters in Southern California battling the Nixon fire, which has grown to more than 4,900 acres with 0% containment since Monday. And in Colorado, authorities contending with the Alexander Mountain fire and the New Stone Canyon fire, which has destroyed at least one home so far.
Well, even the park fire now 18% contained, but firefighters still racing against time to try to get a handle on this thing, as extreme triple-digit temperatures are expected to move into the area, and that will make conditions on the ground extremely challenging for those firefighters. Eva?
All right, Mola Lengi there for us. Thank you, Mola. Let's go now to the National Association of Black Journalists. They are beginning to have their conversation. The moderators of this panel with former President Donald Trump are taking the stage there. You can see them sitting there on the stage. Former President Donald Trump will be speaking with these three at this convention. Let's take a listen.
This discussion continues a decades-long tradition during election years of inviting journalists to discuss the policies and their impact with the candidates who are running for president and the impact of those policies, especially in black communities. Former Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton have attended the NABJ conventions either as presidents or as presidential candidates in past years. NABJ is currently in conversation with Vice President Kamala Harris's team to schedule a Q&A either in person or virtually in September. As journalists, we use opportunities like these both to inform our reporting, but also to help voters understand the choices that they face in a consequential and historic election year. NABJ has partnered with PolitiFact to fact-check this conversation in real time. You can access that feed on social media using the hashtag NABJFactCheck. Again, the hashtag is NABJFactCheck. We have a lot to get to, and we do not want to waste any time, so let's bring out the former President of the United States, the Republican nominee for president, former President Donald Trump. Mr. President, we so appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe black district attorneys. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country. Including employment, including opportunity zones with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, which is one of the greatest programs ever for black workers and black entrepreneurs. I've done so much, and, you know, and I say this, historically black colleges and universities were out of money. They were stone cold broke, and I saved them, and I gave them long-term financing, and nobody else was doing it. I think it's a very rude introduction. I don't know exactly why you would do something like that. And let me go a step further. I was invited here, and I was told my opponent, whether it was Biden or Kamala, I was told my opponent was going to be here. It turned out my opponent isn't here. You invited me under false pretense. And then you said, you can't do it with Zoom. Well, you know, where's Zoom? She's going to do it with Zoom, and she's not coming. And then you were half an hour late. Just so we understand, I have too much respect for you to be late. They couldn't get their equipment working or something was wrong.
Mr. President, I would love if you could answer the
very
question
nasty
on your rhetoric
question.
and why you
I have
believe
answered
that
the
black voters
question.
should trust you with another 4
I have
years.
been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act?
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work, in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace.
Let me just ask a follow-up, sir, and then we'll move on to other questions here. Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition.
Sir,
of
I'm
that.
asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
it. Define it for me, if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So, I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly, very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn, and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do
And
you
I
believe
think,
that
I think
she is
somebody should look into that, too, when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some Republicans
I really don't
have
know.
said?
I mean, I really don't know. Could be. There are some, and there are plenty. I know this lady right over there, Harris, is a fantastic person who just interviewed me at length, and we had a great interview, I think, and I heard you got very good ratings on that
Well,
interview.
you told me it was the longest one of your life, so we had a good discussion. Look, I want to talk about why you're here today. I mean, it is not lost on us how divided we are as a country. And as you were coming today, we really got to see that we are divided along the lines of race, along the lines of gender. And there is this question of, in this moment where we are, why come here? What is your message today?
My message is to stop people from invading our country that are taking, frankly, a lot of problems with it. But one of the big problems, and a lot of the journalists in this room I know and I have great respect for, a lot of the journalists in this room are black. I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a black job, sir?
A black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And
Mr. President,
they're taking the employment away from black people. They're coming in, they're invading. It's an invasion of millions of people, probably 15, 16, 17 million people. I have a feeling it's much more than that. And everybody's been seeing what's happened. The first group of people, the black population, is affected most by that. And Kamala is allowing it to happen. She's the border czar. She's the worst border czar in the history of the world. There's never been a border czar like this. She's never even essentially been. She said she was there once, but not the right part of the border. So she was a border czar. She's done a horrible job. These people are coming into our country, and they're taking black jobs and Hispanic jobs, and frankly, they're taking union jobs. Unions are being very badly affected by all of the millions of people that are pouring into our country. And one thing, as we discussed, many of these people are coming in from mental institutions, from prisons, from jails. They're gang members in other countries. Other countries are setting loose their prisoners. They're opening up their prisons and their mental institutions, and they're taking their They're bad people, drug dealers, gang members, and they're bringing them into the United States. And by the way, their crime rate is going down, and our crime rate is going to be a disaster.
Mr. President, I want to get into how you address some of the issues with black communities. And I say that plural because we live in communities of color that are different. We're not all the same. We don't vote the same. We don't think the same. It's not monolithic. So as you come here today, I want to talk about something that bursts, and this is the weight of the inflation on this country right now. The nonprofit Money Management International recently released data from its mid-year analysis that we have found a 52% rise in people who are seeking counseling for being in credit debt. They're paying for food that is sky high on their credit cards, and now they can't pay that off. The credit counseling nonprofit MMI, as I said, is saying now that they've seen surges that they haven't seen since we were in a pandemic of people in financial trouble. Much of that falls on the shoulders of single moms, single black moms, when you look statistically. Yeah. How do you turn it around? What's your plan for the black community when it comes to money?
So, first of all, it's very hard to hear you for whatever reason because of the fact that they have bad equipment, because I guess, you know, this woman was unable to get the right equipment. But it's very hard for me to hear you, but I can hear every other word. It's very difficult, actually. But so I don't know if they can fix it or do something with it, but I'll do the best I can with it. The inflation is absolutely destroying our middle class, our working class, virtually every class. Inflation is a disaster in our country. Inflation is a country buster. It breaks every country. And we had, in my opinion, the worst inflation we've had. They say it's 58 years, but I think it's much more than that. It's been devastating. And if you just take a look at a lot of things they don't include, like interest rates. Interest rates went from 2.4% to 10%, and you can't get the money. People can't buy houses. They no longer have the American dream. Young people, young black people, they don't have the American dream anymore. They can't buy a house. They can't borrow the money because of the cost of the money. They can't buy because of the cost of housing, because of the cost to build it, because of inflation. Inflation is a disaster, and it's destroying our country. And it's destroying the black community probably as much or more.
So what do you do?
Than any.
What's your plan?
You know what we have to do? We have to bring down the cost of energy, and that's going to bring down the cost of inflation. This was all started with a bad energy policy by Joe Biden. By the way, just if I might, I was running against a man named Biden. You probably saw that. And he was losing very badly in the polls, and then he had a rather bad debate. I would say it was a bad debate. I would say it was one of the worst debates in history, and his poll numbers crashed. And instead of saying, you know, let's keep going and maybe something happens the other way, they said, oh, we're going to replace him. Let's just replace him. That's like you're in a fight, a prize fighter's in a fight. He's not doing well. You say, let's bring in another fighter. So our whole campaign was steered toward him, and now we have to steer toward him. But ultimately, it's the same because they have bad policy. They have policies of open borders, unbelievable open borders, horrible energy policies. They want to get rid of, as you say, gasoline in cars. They want to get rid of oil. They want to get rid of efficient heating.
Mr. President.
Environmentally, what they're doing is killing our country. They're absolutely destroying our country. But the inflation is the thing that's hurting the black worker, the black population, and every other population within our country. Inflation is the worst it's been, I think, in over 100 years. And they'll fact check it. They'll say it's only 58. Whatever it may be, they don't add all the numbers. They don't add the really bad numbers, and you can check that too. But inflation, Harris, is absolutely destroying this country and the people in our country. Yes,
Mr. President, can I ask you another question that is also impacting black Americans?
And that's very clear now. Good.
I'm sorry?
It's very clear. I hear you.
Okay. So Sonia Massey, someone from Illinois, an unarmed black woman, was shot the other day in her home by a deputy sheriff. The deputy has since been charged with murder. You said police would get immunity from prosecution if you win. Why should someone like that officer have immunity, in your opinion?
Immunity?
Immunity.
I don't know the exact case, but I saw something, and it didn't look good to me. It didn't look good to me. Are you talking with the water, right?
Yeah, well, police unions are not backing this person either.
Okay.
But again, why would...
Are they going to be charging the officer? I guess they're charging the officer.
So why should he receive immunity?
Well, he might not. I mean, it depends. It depends on what happens. I'm talking about people that are much different cases than that. We need people to protect ourselves. And by the way, in Chicago, as an example, a few weeks ago, July 4th weekend, they had 117 shootings and 17 deaths. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. We need to have our police officers have the respect and dignity back. In this particular case, I saw something that didn't look good to me. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all.
So can you get a little more specific back to the immunity question? Who would make those
Well, right now, for the most part, people are protected by their unions, by their police unions, or by their police departments. But I'm saying if I felt, or if a group of people would feel that somebody was being unfairly prosecuted because the person did a good job maybe with crime, or made a mistake, an innocent mistake. There's a big difference between being a bad person and making an innocent mistake. But if somebody made an innocent mistake, I would want to help that person.
What would those exceptions be? What would determine an innocent mistake?
You go after somebody, and it's a very close call, and it's very dangerous. And, you know, they have... the policeman's life, and woman, is a very difficult thing, because sometimes you have less than a second to make a, life and death decision. And sometimes very bad decisions are made. They're not made from an evil standpoint, but they're made from the standpoint of they made a mistake.
So I want to follow up really quickly. I find it interesting because you do talk about reining in prosecutors, especially when it comes to prosecutors that are prosecuting you. Why doesn't that skepticism apply to law enforcement?
Well, I've been prosecuted because I'm a political opponent of two people that have weaponized our justice system. I've been prosecuted. I just won the big case in Florida. Everyone said that was the biggest case. That was the most difficult case. And I just won it. Now, Biden has a similar case, except much worse. I was protected under the Presidential Records Act. Biden wasn't, because he wasn't president at the time. And he had 50 years worth of documents. And they ruled that he was incompetent, and therefore he shouldn't stand trial. And I said, isn't that something? He's incompetent, and he can't stand trial, and yet he can be president. Isn't that nice?
Mr. President,
but they released him on the basis that he was incompetent. They said he had no memory, and he was a nice old guy, but he had no memory, and therefore we're not going to prosecute him. I won the case, and it got very little publicity. I didn't notice ABC doing any publicity on it, George.
We covered you extensively, sir. I'd love to move over on to different topics.
I didn't notice you do any publicity on it at all. I won the case, the biggest case. This is an attack on a political opponent. I have another one where I have a hostile judge.
We have you for a limited time, sir. I'd love to move on to different topics.
No, excuse you. You're the one that held me up for 35 minutes, just so you understand.
If we can move on now to the state of the race, sir, I want to get back to the campaign. Senator J.D. Vance is your running mate. He's had a lot of controversy lately, and I want to read you a few things that he has said in the past. He said the Democrats running the country are a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. He's not talking here about how great it is to be a parent. He's attacking what he says are the choices people are making to not have children. Did you know that he had these views about people who do not have children before you picked him to be your running mate, and do you agree with him?
No, I know this. He is very family-oriented, and he thinks family is a great thing. That doesn't mean he thinks that if you don't have a family, it's not. I know people with families. I know people with great families. I know people with very troubled families. And I also know people with no families. They didn't meet the right person. Things happen. You go through life, you don't meet the right person.
But he's not just talking about families here. He also says that people that don't have children should get less votes than those that do.
I'm just speaking for myself.
Is that your campaign
I think
position?
I'm speaking for him, too. He strongly believes in family. But I know people with great families. I know people with not great families that don't have a family. And the people without the family are far better. They're superior in many cases, okay? He's not saying they're not. What he's saying is that he thinks the family experience is a very important thing. It's a very good thing. But that doesn't mean that if you grow up and you grow older and you don't meet somebody that would be wonderful to meet and would have been good, that that's a bad thing. He's not saying that. My interpretation, you'll have to ask him, actually, but my interpretation is he's strongly family-oriented, but that doesn't mean if you don't have a family, there's something wrong with it.
Just one last point, and then we'll move on. Just one of the bedrock principles of American life is one person, one vote. Senator J.D. Vance has suggested that someone who has children should have more votes than a person who does not have children. I just want to be clear here. Is that the position of your campaign?
Well, no, but it's not something I have ever heard before. I can tell you this. Right now you have illegal aliens coming into our country, many from prisons and many from mental institutions, and they want to give them votes. I don't think they should have votes. They came into our country illegally, and they're taking the vote away from all of the people in this room that have been here a long time, that have worked hard, that in many cases, and you'll see this happening, if I'm not elected, you're going to see it happening. If I am, you're not going to have any problem. But you're going to see it happening a long time. You're going to see the people in this room and people outside of this room are going to be losing their jobs to people that have come into this country illegally.
Mr. President, can we stay with just kind of the state of the race right now? Because I felt like that vice president question, candidate question was right in there with that. Yeah. So let's talk about J.D. Vance for a little bit. He's had some stumbles out of the gate. I don't know if you're hearing what we hear as reporters, but it's been a tough couple of weeks for him. Why did you choose J.D. Vance?
Why
did you choose him? And I'm having a hard time hearing, too. I know everybody out there can, but it's hard to hear.
I'll tell you why. I chose him because he's a very strong believer in work and the working man and woman, and especially the working man and woman who have been treated very unfairly, because you have many of them in this room. But you have many of those people, they were treated very unfairly. They worked very hard, and they were treated unfairly. He wrote the book that became a bestseller. The movie became a smash hit. He's a very smart guy. Without the benefit of having a family that has contacts, like a father that was well-connected, he got into Yale Law School. He graduated in 2 years from Ohio State, summa cum laude. I mean, you take a look at, his career has been an amazing career. He started off at a level with a difficult family situation, very difficult, with the mother and the father and everything else. He ends up going to Yale Law School and was one of the top students, became the head of the Law Journal. I mean, that's an amazing thing. He's a 4-year, he was in the military with great distinction for 4 years, got out, went into business, became successful in business, very successful in business, actually, did public offerings and other things. And I have to believe in that. I mean, he's somebody that was born in a rough situation. Most of the people know that situation because it was very well documented in his book. And I have a lot of respect for somebody that can get into Yale and become one of the best students in Yale, that meets a young woman at Yale who was also outstanding, and they get married, they have a beautiful family. But he had he's made himself an amazing life. He then goes to Ohio, lives in Ohio, and he had my endorsement. That helped. But he wins the Senate. He becomes a United States Senator. So he's a United States Senator. And so, Harris, like I respect you for your success, I respect people for their success.
The reason I asked the question is because the last time you and I sat and talked was the day that you were shot. We'd been together for much of that day. You left to go to Butler, Pennsylvania, and we didn't know what was next.
Yeah.
And 2 days after that...
I cannot understand. Your microphone
I know,
is so
it is really hard for me to understand you, too.
I can understand you perfectly.
Because she's closer.
I can understand you.
I'm happy to hear that, sir.
But I can't
really
understand, Harris.
I have a few more questions.
Because of the distance, and the mics are really in lousy shape, but I cannot understand
Are you asking a question?
what you're saying.
So what I wanted to say was the last time we spoke, you said some words that were prophetic because I asked you who you wanted to choose for vice president.
Yeah.
And you said normally it really wouldn't matter what they would bring. You choose somebody that you think has a future, that sort of thing. But you said these words 3.5 hours before an attempted assassination on your life. You told me that bad things happen, Harris, and that's why this decision is important this time. Bad things happen. You said it twice. When you look at J.D. Vance, is he ready on day one?
Does he what?
Ready on day one, if he has to be.
I've always had great respect for him, and for the other candidates too. But I will say this, and I think this is well documented. Historically, the vice president, in terms of the election, does not have any impact. I mean, virtually no impact. You have 2 or 3 days where there's a lot of commotion as to who, like you're having it on the Democrat side, who it's going to be. And then that dies down, and it's all about the presidential pick. Virtually never has it mattered. Maybe Lyndon Johnson mattered for different reasons of what we're talking about, not for vote reasons, but for political reasons, other political reasons. But historically, the choice of a vice president makes no difference. You're voting for the president, and you can have a vice president who's outstanding in every way, and I think JD is. I think that all of them would have been. But you're not voting that way. You're voting for the president. You're voting for me. If you like me, I'm going to win. If you don't like me, I'm not going to win.
I'm going to get my J.D. Vance question in.
J.D. Vance?
I'm going to get my J.D. Vance question in. To your point and to Rachel's point, he, has a lot of opinions about childless women like myself or divorced people like yourself. Do you think, well, I mean, my point is here. But at least it
was said in a friendly manner.
My point is, do you think the Republican Party is getting a little bit too judgy about people's lives when you think about abortion or when you think about what J.D. Vance is saying?
I don't think, look, I think that the Democrat Party is really the one that has the problem. I think they're radical on abortion because they're allowing abortion in the 9th month. They're allowing the death of a baby after the baby is born, based on the governor of Virginia. Based on the governor of Virginia, they're allowing the death of the baby after it's born. They're allowing abortions in the 8th and 9th month.
Well, Democrats have denied.
I think they're right. And I think the Republican Party is actually much less. I think I've made them much less radical, perhaps. But the Republican Party, what we're doing is bringing it back to the states where everybody wanted it. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody wanted abortion brought back. They didn't want Roe v. Wade in the federal government. They wanted it, everybody.
But the majority of
back.
Americans oppose Roe v. Wade being overturned.
They don't know about this. Right now, they're voting. It brought it back to the states. Now, I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Ronald Reagan believed with rape, incest, life of the mother. I do. I think most people do. I think most Republicans do also. But if you take a look, right now they're doing, it's an amazing thing, out of the federal government, it's in states, and people are voting. And I will say, Ohio is, let's call it a more liberal version, has been approved. Kansas, the same thing, a little bit surprising to a lot of people. But the people are now voting. And it's taking this issue that's been going on for 52 years and has torn our country apart, and it's giving it to the people to vote on. And they're voting. And many states have already voted. Others are in the process of voting. And it's bringing it back to the people and a vote of the people. And it's not at all radical. And again, you have to follow your heart. I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Most people believe in the 3 exceptions. Most Republicans believe in the exceptions. But they don't want to see an abortion in the 9th month or the 8th month. Almost everybody agrees to that. And they certainly don't want to see, in the case of the governor of Virginia, the former governor, I might add, who said, we set the baby aside and then we decide what to do. Meaning, what do? We execute the baby. That's a radical, horrible position. And some people want that. I don't want it. Most people don't.
Thank you. Can I just pivot really quickly to another question about, you brought up health, Harris. You're an active man. We see you golfing all the time. But if you win, you'll still be president at 82, which is older than Biden is right now.
But not mentally. Look, mentally.
Here's the question.
He's shot. But most people, I know many people in their 80s and their 90s that are in great shape. Some of our greatest leaders. You look at throughout the world history, the greatest leaders, some of the greatest leaders in the world were in their 80s.
But here's the question. Would you consider stepping down if you felt that your health was declining? Or would you?
Oh, absolutely.
And who would make,
I think I'd know.
How would you make that decision?
I think I'd know. Look, if I came onto a stage like this and I got treated so rudely as this woman treated me, And I'm fine with it because she was very rude, sir. Very rude. That was a nasty, that wasn't a question. She didn't ask me a question. She gave a statement. That wasn't a question.
I repeated your statement, sir, actually.
You said you would. You would.
Oh,
make that
absolutely.
decision
If
to
I
step
thought
down.
that I was failing in some way, I want people to be sharp. I'll go a step further. I want anybody running for president to take an aptitude test, to take a cognitive test. I think it's a great idea. And I took 2 of them and I aced them.
Well,
I took 2 of them. But let me ask you.
Yeah.
I would like to have people running for president, and I don't mean because they're 75 or 85. I think anybody running, I'd like to do it. People say it's not constitutional. I would like to have something passed where you can do it. I think we should know. I mean, I've watched what's happened in the last couple of years under this gentleman, and our country is a mess. We have inflation. We have the millions of people falling in. We have Afghanistan, which was the worst, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. What he has done to our country, and her too, what they've done to our country, she has been a horrible vice president. She's considered the worst vice president in the history of our country.
Don't mean to interrupt you, but would you consider taking the cognitive test?
Mr. President.
I would love to
and
do
make it public.
Well, I've already taken 2 of them, but I'll do it again.
Mr. President, how do you intend to...
I suggested, Harris, that let's take one. I said, Joe and I will go and take a cognitive test. Now, I'd do it with her, too. I would do it with her also. You know what? She failed her law exam. She didn't pass her law exam, so maybe she wouldn't pass the cognitive test.
Mr. President, are you saying she wouldn't pass? Just to be clear,
I'm just giving you the facts.
To be clear, you don't think Harris... How do you intend...
She didn't pass her bar exam, and she didn't think she would pass it, and she didn't think she was going to ever pass it. And I don't know what happened. Maybe she passed it.
She did pass it.
There's a man over here. I think he must work for
Mr. President, I would love to ask you about January 6th. You've called yourself the candidate of law and order.
Yeah.
When Time Magazine asked you if you would consider pardoning all the rioters, you said, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
You called them patriots. 140 police officers were assaulted that day. Their injuries included broken bones. At least 1 officer lost an eye. 1 had 2 cracked ribs, 2 smashed spinal discs. Another had a stroke. Were the people who assaulted those 140 officers, including those I just mentioned, patriots who deserve pardons?
Well, let me bring it back to modern day. Like about 5 days ago, we had an attack on the Capitol, a horrible attack on the Capitol. You saw the people that were protesting and spraying these incredible monuments, bells, lions, all these magnificent limestone and granite with red paint, red spray paint that will never actually come off, especially in the limestone. It will never, I'm a builder, I know about this stuff. It'll never, you'll see it in 100 years from now. They viciously attacked our government. They fought with police. They fought with them much more openly than I saw on January 6th. What's going to happen to those people? What's going to happen to the people in Portland that destroyed that city?
But, sir, my question is on those.
What's going to happen to the people that tried to burn
rioters who assaulted officers.
You have to
would you pardon
what's
those
going to
people?
happen? Oh, absolutely, I would.
You would pardon those?
If they're innocent, I would pardon them.
They've been convicted.
And by the way, the Supreme Court just well, they were convicted by a very tough system. How come the people that tried to burn down Minneapolis, how come the people that took over a large percentage of Seattle, how come nothing happened to them? How come the people
But, sir, we're
that,
talking about people that were seen beating
We're
officers
talking
with
about federal
flagpoles,
buildings.
dragging them down the stairs. They're on video. Have you seen that video, sir?
Oh, really? Well,
you would pardon those rioters?
They shot a young lady in the face who was protesting. They shot her in the face. You know, nobody died that day. You do know that. But people died in Seattle. Nobody died, but people died in Minneapolis. You know people died in Minneapolis. And nothing happens, and nobody ever talks, and nothing happens to those people. But you went after the J6 people with a vengeance. And I'll tell you what about the cops that were, and I'm all for the police, as you know, but what about the police that are ushering everybody into the Capitol? Go in, go in, go in. What about that? Look, nothing is perfect in life. But you have people from Minneapolis, you have people just from 5 days ago in Washington, D.C. They were having fistfights and fighting with the police. They were spraying and destroying, they were desecrating our monuments in Washington, D.C. 5 days ago, and nothing happened to them. And you can't have two systems of justice. That's why they went after me as a political opponent, because they felt they couldn't win without doing that. And we're going to win our cases, and we're going to be vindicated. But I have to spend a lot of time on that and money. That's what they want. After the election, they won't care. Although in my case, I think they probably will, because the hatred is pretty deep. But I'll tell you, they went after me as a political opponent. That's never happened in our country before, and it sets a terrible, terrible precedent.
What do you do on day one if you win? What's your first thing?
What do? I close the border. And I do two things, because I can do a lot of things simultaneously. I close the border. We don't want people coming in. We want people to come in, Harris, but they have to be vetted. They have to be checked. They have to come in legally. We want people. I want people to come into our country, but they have to be vetted. They have to be checked. So when you say, what do I do? That, and I drill, baby, drill. I bring energy way down. I bring interest rates down. I bring inflation way down so people can buy bacon again, so people can buy a ham sandwich again, so that people can go to a restaurant and afford it. Because right now, people can't buy food. Your grocery bills are up 40, 50, 60%, right? She's agreeing to me. Oh, she's agreeing. Thank you. I like you very much.
Mr. President, I think we are.
But it's true. Your grocery bills are up. And then they're mandating that you buy an all-electric car. You know, Elon Musk endorsed me, and he's a friend of mine. He's a good guy. He's a smart guy. But I'm against everybody having an electric car, okay? I'm very much against that. You have to be able to, if you want a hybrid or if you want a gasoline-propelled car. But, you know, we have more liquid gold, gasoline, oil, under our feet than any other country. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than any other country. I want to use it. I want to use what we have. I want to bring down prices, bring down costs, and I also have to stop the invasion. And remember, they're taking your jobs. These people coming in are taking your jobs.
Project 2025.
I think we have to leave it there by the Trump team.
All right.
So leave it. That is the last word. Thank you so much, Mr. Trump, for coming today and joining us.
Well, thank you very much.
They've been telling us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, very much. Great honor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
NABJ will email about details regarding the conversation with Vice President Kamala Harris in September. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Hello there, I'm Amy Pilgrim. We take you see there now, Donald Trump just finishing up a panel with the NABJ convention there. It was hosted by 3 different journalists from 3 different outlets. Rachel Scott from ABC News, our senior congressional correspondent, Kadia Goba from Semaphore, and Harris Faulkner from Fox News. Let's bring in some let's play some sound right now from the beginning of this panel so you can hear what former President Donald Trump had to say.
I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe black district attorneys. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner, a first question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country, including employment, including opportunity zones with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, which is one of the greatest programs ever for black workers and black entrepreneurs. I've done so much, and, you know, and I say this, historically black colleges and universities were out of money. They were stone cold broke, and I saved them, and I gave them long-term financing, and nobody else was doing it. I think it's a very rude introduction. I don't know exactly why you would do something like that. And let me go a step further. I was invited here, and I was told my opponent, whether it was Biden or Kamala, I was told my opponent was going to be here. It turned out my opponent isn't here. You invited me under false pretense. And then you said, you can't do it with Zoom. Well, you know, where's Zoom? She's going to do it with Zoom, and she's not coming. And then you were half an hour late. Just so we understand, I have too much respect for you to be late. They couldn't get their equipment working or something was wrong.
Mr. President, I would love
if you
can answer the question on your rhetoric and why you
I have
believe
answered the
that black voters
question.
should trust you with another 4
I have
years.
been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act?
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work, in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace. I really do.
Let me just ask a follow-up, sir, and then we'll move on to other questions here.
That was former President Donald Trump answering questions on a panel at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. Let's bring in our Catherine Faulders. I'm curious, Catherine, as you were watching him take those questions on that panel, what were the key takeaways for you about what he had to say?
Yeah, I thought that was just absolutely an incredible questioning on that panel, and frankly, especially by Rachel Scott, who pressed the former president on multiple issues that he admitted he was uncomfortable answering, and he did go after her and attack her in various different ways. But he was pressed on his past rhetoric and what he has said about whether it's black journalists, whether it's the black population, whether it's black elected members of Congress or elected officials across the country. And right out of the gate, he just began attacking journalists and those in the room while refusing to really engage on those previous inflammatory comments that he's made. I do think it was a striking setting for the former president to be in, and frankly, he hasn't faced that type of questioning in quite some time in a setting like that. So pretty remarkable to see that sort of event. I guess it was almost an hour long, but again, asked a number of questions on his previous inflammatory rhetoric from his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, which he didn't particularly seem to defend that well. I believe he said it doesn't really matter who you pick as your vice president. It's usually the president, who is kind of diminishing Vance's role, if you will. But a lot to unpack from that whole panel, and just excellent questioning all around by Trump, who is very rarely in a setting such as that.
And Mary Alice Parks, let's bring you in, because it is so unusual to see the former president in that kind of setting. We know he loves to be in rooms full of big crowds of people, but this was a room full of mostly journalists, and 3 of them were asking him questions. As you were watching this unfold, what did you notice?
I mean, to Catherine's point, he didn't want to answer their questions, didn't like their questions, and right off the bat seemed to sort of make the point that Rachel Scott was making with her line of questioning. She was asking about his often sort of derogatory language against journalists, and specifically journalists of color, and right off the bat, instead of answering her question, he basically started mocking her and complaining about her, and complaining about her tone, complaining about the setup and equipment there, suggesting that she was unfair just by asking what was, of course, a very fair question. You know, I was struck just by how combative he was. He is running for president of the United States, Eva, so taking tough questions is part of the gig. Americans want to know what someone is offering when they are running, if they can handle the pressure, if they can handle the heat, and they want to know their answers to these really tough questions. You know, fair questions about his running mate, fair questions about his running mate's platforms, fair questions about his past administration. And the fact that I think he was seemed flustered, seemed combative, seemed really defensive, argumentative, didn't help his case that he was sort of ready for the rest of this campaign.
And Mary Alice, just to put it in context for people, how unusual is it to see candidates on a stage like the NABJ convention?
I think in larger context, it's not unusual at all. I think it's extremely unusual with Trump. He has, in this campaign season so far, only done interviews really almost exclusively with essentially right-wing or right-leaning media. He has not sort of subjected himself to questions from a large swath of journalists, from a wide range of journalists, from national outlets and national networks like us. And so in that setting, in that way, in that light, it was highly unusual that he agreed to this. So of course, kudos to him. Any candidate that will sit and take questions, that's what we like as journalists, obviously. I think that in general, though, candidates that aren't Trump very often during a campaign sit in forums like this, sit for moderated discussions, whether it's with editorial boards or with network interviews, with press conferences. So how he compares to other candidates, I think that this was doing something that was actually very typical, just very atypical for him.
And Catherine, we kind of want to go through some of the fact-checking of the things that he said. One of the claims that he made during this panel was that Kamala Harris previously mostly identified as Indian and then more recently began identifying as black. The fact checker on the NABJ website says that's false. Talk us through this.
Yeah, I'm not really totally sure what to make of that comment from former President Trump, that she didn't identify as black and now she identifies as black. That's not true. The fact checker said that wasn't true. I haven't heard that sort of criticism from the former president before. It seems like something new that he's started to say. But I really honestly don't know what to make of that, except for the fact that that's what he said, and that's not true. It's not something that Harris has been out there saying publicly. So I think it's just another one of those examples from the former president as he frankly tries to find a new attack line on his now new opponent in the race. Just another example of something that he's coming up with that's just not true at all.
Let's bring in LZ Granderson into this conversation. LZ, I'm so curious, as you were watching this, what you were thinking and the takeaways that you have.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I was thinking this is what the National Association of Black Journalists get. I mean, what did we expect? I've been a member of this organization since I was in college. I've never seen us do something like this before. And not by this, I'm not referring to inviting a former president or a nominee from the GOP side. I'm saying someone that we know is just going to lie. Someone that we know we have to fact check in real time. Like, we're journalists. Like, why present a situation that you know won't be optimal in terms of the practice of journalism at a journalism conference? So I was upset and embarrassed when I found out. I have COVID, which is the only reason why I'm not there right now. I'm quarantining, but I'm just completely flabbergasted that they thought, they being the leaders, from the president down, thought somehow this was supposed to be beneficiary for journalists or for the practice of journalism. It was just another opportunity for the former president to lie nonstop. And even if you try to fact check him in real time, because he continues to lie so often and just, you know, almost without any sort of hint of irony to it, I mean, like to say that the vice president hates Jewish people when she's married to a Jewish man, this notion that he saved HBCUs, you know, the Obama administration before him, you know, gave more than $7 billion to HBCUs. What is he talking about? But it's almost impossible even to continue to fact check him in real time because the lies are nonstop. It's almost like water flowing through a hose.
And to your point about fact checking, let's go through that fact check some more. Let's talk to Mary Alice Parks about, he made this mention about jobs, about the migrants in the southern border were taking jobs from Black Americans. Mary Alice, what's the reality there?
I mean, first, let's just talk about how it's an incredibly offensive comment. The idea that that migrants coming across the border are, he said it over and over, and I'm almost at sort of a loss of words of how to describe it without repeating what is an incredibly offensive comment. Some idea that migrants coming across the border are taking jobs of some people because they're, I guess the implication is they are a certain type of job, that, I mean, offensive, that the idea that black Americans wouldn't be working every possible kind of job. You know, I'm thinking back about how Democrats responded when Trump first made these comments on the debate stage, and they were quick to sort of launch a bunch of memes where President Biden said, I know what a black job is. A black job is being the vice president of the United States. Like, how are you implying that the black Americans are only doing some kinds of jobs, and those are the kinds of jobs that migrants are taking? But it also is just beyond sort of being offensive in that way, I think just incredibly inaccurate. The idea that somehow people that are fleeing violence, fleeing across this country, even those that are sort of economic migrants looking for a better opportunity in this country, are replacing or taking jobs of American citizens is not something that the data supports. We actually know that right now in this country, we have a labor shortage. There are actually more jobs available than people that are looking for jobs. Of course, we could get into how unfair and inaccurate it is to talk about wages and benefits that Republicans often claim are going to migrants that should be going to U.S. citizens. So I think that this is worthy of a lengthy fact check, which I'm sure many of my friends in print journalism are working on right now. But it is something that we have heard former President Trump repeat at length. He said it over and over during these remarks. He was asked if he wanted to clarify, and he didn't. Instead, he sort of doubled down. And I think that he's going to continue to face really tough questions from journalists and from voters, and especially from voters of color, about what he means about these, frankly, insensitive and sort of inaccurate statements, Eva.
One of the other things he was asked about was January 6th. Catherine, walk us through kind of the points that he made and what the truth there is.
Yeah, so this was a question from our Rachel Scott, and he was asked specifically in great detail. Rachel laid out all of the horrific things that happened to officers who were injured on January 6th. And Rachel essentially asked Trump if he would commit to the promise of pardoning all of these imprisoned January 6th rioters, to which he said yes, even after, of course, listening to Rachel's question, which ticked through a list of injuries police officers faced that day. I want to read what he said, the quote here. He said, absolutely, I would. If they're innocent, I would pardon them. That's what Trump said. Of course, Rachel Scott then said they've been convicted, so clearly they weren't innocent. And then Trump went into essentially what I interpret as a criticism of the courts and the justice system, if you will. So the whole point of that exchange was that he doubled down on this commitment to pardon these January 6th rioters, especially these violent ones who had injured police officers, for example, who have been convicted of crimes here. So Trump had at times previously said in blanket terms he would pardon all the January 6th rioters. Then he appeared to kind of scale back that rhetoric a little bit over time, saying, I'll probably pardon some of them, maybe not all of them. I forget the exact phrase that he's used, because his view has evolved on this a bit. But today, at least, when confronted with those facts, those specific facts from various different rioters who were at the Capitol that day on January 6th, Trump did double down and say that he would pardon them if they were innocent, even though they're not. So that gives a pretty decent window into his thinking about what he intends to do if he does, in fact, win the presidency with those people who have been convicted of crimes stemming from January 6th.
With voters, oftentimes what they're many times looking for is, what can you do for me? So if you look past the rhetoric, LZ, his policies, the actual things that he stands for and what he plans to implement if he becomes president, what does that mean for black voters?
What does it mean for all Americans, really? I mean, it's important that we, as journalists, but also as voters, move away from thinking it's all about the rhetoric and it's about people's feelings being hurt. The rhetoric is actually informing you on how they're going to legislate. And I'll take this for one example. The rhetoric that's been tied to how former President Trump talked about the protesters, the January 6th protesters versus protesters against police brutality. It isn't just about your feelings being hurt. He's also telling you that he wants to pardon police officers permanently, right? Like just across the board, have immunity that allows them to be more physical and enforce and maybe cross the a line when it comes to handling protesters going forward. And this isn't based on, just a gut feeling. This is actually based on the words of his former Secretary of Defense, who talked about the fact that President Trump actually suggested shooting protesters in 2020. That is the words of his former cabinet member. So, it isn't just simply, my feelings of being hurt or that Black Americans or women are upset about the cat lady remarks. It's about how does this glimpse into his mindset and worldview informs his policies, and how will these policies impact Americans? Move past how your feelings are hurt and ask yourself, is this someone who, if they have this viewpoint about protesters, when there is another impropriety that happens between law enforcement and people in the community, where does the president stand? How would the White House be used? How would the power of the White House and the bully pulpit be used? And whether or not you feel it is inclusive of all Americans, or are you really actually seeing that the rhetoric wasn't just rhetoric at all, but actually an informed worldview into how the policy will be enforced and what the new legislation will be if there's a second Trump presidency?
Let's talk about those cat lady remarks, because those remarks actually came from his running mate, the person he chose to be his vice presidential candidate, which is J.D. Vance. Mary Alice Parks, there have been a lot of moments with J.D. Vance in the last several days. Harris Faulkner from Fox News even described the missteps that he has had coming onto the stage. He didn't seem to really defend him that strongly.
He defended even his choice of Vance. He didn't defend those past statements per se, and he didn't want to associate himself with them or say that they were the policy position sort of his campaign. For example, Rachel asked specifically whether or not it was his position that, as Vance has suggested, he thought that people who have kids should essentially have more voting power. Vance once sort of quibbed that he thought if you had kids, you should be able to vote on behalf of your kids as well. You saw Trump sort of disassociate himself from that line. But he did sort of defend choosing Vance. He talked about Vance's unbelievable background, his backstory, how he overcame adversity, the work that he did to sort of overcome a broken house, his mother's struggles with addiction, how he went on to go to Yale Law School, be a successful sort of businessman, sort of make it to the United States Senate. So clearly, President Trump sort of excited and passionate about Vance's personal story, and still does believe that that is a value add, of course, to his ticket. But it was interesting when he was pressed more and more on Vance's views of the family. We have heard Vance over and over sort of lift up the traditional family, talk about how more Americans should want to have kids, feel encouraged to have kids, that he's worried about declining birth rates in this country. Trump really seemed to double down on that, sort of hinted that he too thinks that, at one point he used the word superior, that he too thinks that Americans who have families are potentially superior, and that should be elevated, sort of a traditional family in this country. I don't know how well that's going to sit with independent voters, swing voters, moderate voters, who we've seen in the last week, Eva, really put off by some of Vance's comments, really conservative comments about those Americans that choose not to have families.
There's a lot still to unpack from this hour panel that just unfolded. Mary Alice Parks, LZ Granderson, Catherine Falders, thank you all for joining us for this. To the Middle East now, and the growing threat of a wider regional conflict after the assassination of Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Hamas says a rocket hit the room where he was staying in the Iranian capital. Both Hamas and Iran blame Israel for that attack. And while the Israeli government has not claimed responsibility, this image was briefly posted to its official press office Facebook page. You can see the word "eliminated" posted over the Hamas leader's head. All of that coming one day after Israel did claim responsibility for an attack targeting a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut, Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking earlier today and acknowledging the Beirut strike, but not the one in Iran. We have team coverage with Matt Rivers in Tel Aviv, Marcus Moore in Beirut, and former CIA Senior Operations Officer Daryl Blocker. Matt, let's start with you. What do we know about the strike in Tehran, and what is the Israeli government saying about it?
You know, we don't know all that much, and that is because the Iranian government is really keeping all this information close to the vest. It was Hamas at first that told us that their political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, had been killed in Tehran. We heard from other Hamas officials during the day that it was a rocket that actually entered the room where he was staying in Tehran, but we haven't really seen pictures of it. We haven't gotten more information from the Iranians, and as for the Israelis, they're not even acknowledging it. Earlier today when we asked, they say we don't comment on reports in foreign media, so they want nothing to do with taking credit for this assassination. But Iran certainly blaming the Israelis here, with the supreme leader of that country saying they will take revenge for the killing of Haniyeh on their soil. I think the fact that they're not saying much is very indicative of the fact that the Iranians here were embarrassed. This was a security a mess up on their part, because Haniyeh was there at their invitation to be at the inauguration of Iran's new president. Just hours after he was seen smiling at that inauguration, he was dead in this apparent airstrike. So the Iranians have a lot to answer for at this point within their own community there. And also the big question, of course, how will they respond? They say it will be severe, but we don't know when, how, or what that looks like.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wait and see. Marcus, Israel is believed to have taken out a top Hezbollah commander in Beirut yesterday. This is an Iranian-backed militant group. How are they responding?
Well, Eva, after going through most of the day here in Beirut, completely silent, Hezbollah did release a short statement today acknowledging the death of Fouad Shakur, who was their top military commander in Hezbollah, saying that he was in the building that Israel struck yesterday evening here in Beirut. But the statement is very short. It only says that, quote, our political position on the heinous attack and the major crime will be expressed by the Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who is expected to speak tomorrow.